At 6:42 a.m. on November 7, 2008, weather conditions across the Bitterroot Valley registered clear skies, a wind chill of 28 degrees Fahrenheit and a thin frost layer coating the surrounding pines. Witness statements, timestamped surveillance, and verified accounts confirmed that Diane Carver, resident of Hamilton, Montana, watched her 4 sons, Wyatt, 28, Nolan, 26, Levi, 24, and Tucker, 22, depart her property in a 1999 blue Ford F-150 registered under Wyatt's name. Their intended destination, a designated hunting zone deep within the Bitterroot National Forest, approximately 43 miles southwest of Hamilton. The brothers were experienced hunters, familiar with the terrain, having accompanied their late father on annual expeditions since adolescence. Equipment inventory later recovered from the truck logs indicate standard hunting provisions: rifles, 4 orange vests, 4 GPS unit, ammunition, water canisters, and preserved food sufficient for a single-day trip. Weather forecasts reported mild daylight conditions with temperature drops expected after 6 p.m. The morning atmosphere, reconstructed from Diane's testimony and later corroborated by neighbors, presented no sign of distress or forewarning. The brothers were described as calm, joking, and organized, individuals conditioned to wilderness conditions and safety procedures. Diane Carver prepared breakfast shortly before their departure, after which she remained outside the residence, observing their vehicle vanish beyond the frost-covered road. Her recollection: it was the sound of the truck fading that stayed with me. By 8:17 a.m., cell tower pings tracked Wyatt's and Nolan's phones en route along Route 93, later transitioning into the service-dead zones near the forest entry at Lost Horse Creek. At 9:03 a.m., ranger station logs confirmed the Ford's passage beyond Gate 4, last checkpoint before the open hunting corridor known as Widow's Draw Trailhead. From that moment, no further communication or verifiable signal from any of the brothers was recorded. Diane Carver's account establishes the following pattern of expectation: the brothers were due to return home by 7 p.m., customary for their hunting rituals, arriving before dark, cleaning gear, and logging kills. The family's unbroken tradition dated back 15 years. Their discipline in timing was considered precise, almost ritualistic. The notion of them failing to report or call was viewed as impossible by relatives and close associates. At 4:56 p.m., sunset descended behind the Bitterroot Range, casting elongated shadows across the valley floor. From multiple roadside witnesses, the distant sound of thunder was reported from the North Ridge, though no storm activity was registered on meteorological radar. By 6:30 p.m., Diane Carver began to monitor the driveway, expecting headlights to appear along the gravel bend. None did. At 7:45 p.m., initial anxiety developed when calls to Wyatt's phone transferred directly to voicemail. At 8:02 p.m., Nolan's line disconnected mid-ring. Attempts continued until midnight, all unanswered. By that hour, the forest had grown silent, wind speeds dropping to negligible. At 12:20 a.m., Diane contacted the Bitterroot County Sheriff's non-emergency dispatch, reporting her sons overdue by 5 hours. She was advised to wait until morning, standard procedure for experienced outdoorsmen known to camp overnight. She refused, driving alone toward the Widow's Draw Trailhead. At 1:13 a.m., her vehicle headlights illuminated the brothers' truck. The engine was cold. Tire tracks surrounding the vehicle were minimal, undisturbed by recent activity. The truck's doors were locked, keys hanging from the ignition. The bed contained all spare supplies, fuel canister, additional rations, and a sealed thermos of coffee, its surface coated in thin frost. Wildlife prints, later determined to be elk, circled 50 yards north. No human tracks were visible. Scene documentation conducted at first daylight confirmed her description in full accuracy. No evidence of forced entry, conflict, or environmental hazard was recorded near the site. It appeared as though the Carver brothers had simply stepped into the wilderness and ceased to exist within it. Subsequent forensic review of soil displacement around the vehicle estimated no more than 8 boot imprints, believed to belong to the brothers themselves, ending abruptly 10 meters from the forest line. Beyond that, Pine needles and early frost obscured any further trace. Investigators noted the unsettling symmetry of the scene, the untouched order of personal belongings, the truck's windows fogged evenly on the inside, suggesting residual body heat long gone. The odometer confirmed a total of 78 miles from Hamilton, precisely consistent with the planned route. Everything matched their intention to return by nightfall. Everything, except the fact that they never did. By the time dawn broke across Bitterroot County on November 8, 2008, 4 men had disappeared without a sound, without a witness, and without a single verifiable clue. In the earliest official report filed at 9:12 a.m., Sheriff Raymond Hunt summarized it in a single, chilling line. At approximately 1900 hours, the Bitterroot took 4 and gave nothing back. For the Carver family, that day marked the division between life as it had been and the long, unraveling silence that would follow. As the sun set behind those mountains, the forest swallowed the brothers whole. And by the time the stars rose, the Bitterroot was holding a secret it would not give up for 5 long years. The disappearance of the Carver brothers was first logged at 9:42 p.m. On November 12, 2018, when Diane Carver placed a missing persons call to the Ravalli County Sheriff's Department. Her sons, Wyatt, Nolan, Luke, and Adam, had departed for a 2-day hunting trip in the Bitterroot Mountains and were expected back before nightfall. When their truck failed to appear by sundown, and repeated calls to Wyatt's phone went straight to voicemail, concern turned to panic. A patrol unit was dispatched to the main forest access road by 10:30 p.m. The initial sweep located the brothers' 2004 Ford F-150 parked neatly off a logging trail near a place known locally as Widow's Draw. The truck was locked, its keys missing. Inside, investigators documented several items of note: 2 empty coffee cups, a folded hunting map marked with red ink circles, and a thermos still half full of lukewarm coffee. The engine was cold, indicating the vehicle had not been moved for several hours. The surrounding area was meticulously examined under floodlight. No signs of struggle or disturbance were observed. Tire impressions suggested the vehicle had been stationary since the previous morning. The ground, lightly frosted and firm, should have preserved boot prints or drag marks, but none were visible. Not a single footprint led away from the vehicle in any direction. At 2:15 a.m., a ranger team initiated a limited ground search extending a 1-mile radius from the site. They located the brothers' initial campsite, an area approximately 600 yards north of the truck. The tent remained collapsed but intact, with sleeping bags rolled and stored, suggesting they had packed to leave. 4 hunting rifles, registered to Wyatt and Nolan Carver, were missing from the equipment manifest. The only anomaly was a half-eaten venison jerky pack and a small pile of ash where a campfire had been recently extinguished. The fire was determined to have gone out less than 3 hours before discovery. By sunrise, the situation had escalated to a multi-agency operation. Drones equipped with infrared imaging scanned the treeline, detecting no human heat signatures. Helicopter units from Missoula conducted aerial passes but reported 0 visual contact. Tracking dogs were brought in by noon. They lost scent approximately 50 yards from the campsite, as if the trail had evaporated mid-path. Local witnesses offered conflicting accounts. A retired hunter claimed he heard 2 rifle shots around dusk the previous evening, spaced several minutes apart. Another reported seeing flickering lights deeper in the valley, mistaken initially for campers. None of these leads produced actionable results. Within 24 hours, media coverage labeled it, "the Bitterroot vanishing." Officials described the scene as, "bafflingly clean," a phrase later cited in federal reports. Investigators noted the brothers' survival training, experience with wildlife, and strong physical conditioning, attributes that made voluntary disappearance unlikely. No signs of wildlife attack, mechanical failure, or forced abduction were ever substantiated. Blood tests from the campsite soil returned negative for human DNA. No bullet casings, no personal effects, and no digital footprints were recovered. As the second night fell, frost hardened over the tire tracks, preserving the truck like a museum piece. Inside, the thermos had gone completely cold. The vehicle sat in perfect stillness beneath the silent mountain air. And when the final patrol withdrew that evening, one deputy reportedly turned to his partner and said nothing, just stared at the dense black tree line, as if waiting for something to move. But nothing ever did. It was as if the mountains decided to keep them. The full-scale search for the Carver brothers began at dawn on November 14, 2018, 48 hours after their last confirmed sighting. By then, temperatures in the Bitterroot Valley had dropped below freezing, complicating tracking conditions and increasing the urgency of the mission. Over 200 personnel were mobilized: local deputies, volunteer searchers, forest rangers, K-9 units, and National Guard aerial crews. The incident command post was established in the small town of Hamilton, Montana, where the Carvers were well known. The initial operational plan divided the mountain into 6 search sectors. Each sector was methodically swept, with drone surveillance used to map terrain irregularities and identify potential campsites or heat sources. For 3 consecutive days, search teams covered over 50 square miles of rugged wilderness. No trace of the 4 brothers was found. Helicopter crews deployed thermal imaging cameras during night operations, capturing faint heat patterns initially believed to be campfires. When ground teams approached those coordinates, they found nothing but cold ash and animal tracks. Snowfall on the 3rd night erased much of the terrain evidence, forcing command to restart mapping protocols. By day 5, the disappearance had become a regional emergency. National news networks arrived, turning the quiet Hamilton airstrip into a temporary media hub. Headlines referred to the case as the Lost Carvers and speculated on everything from bear attacks to ritual disappearances. Reporters interviewed classmates, neighbors, and co-workers. None could provide context or motive for the brothers' vanishing. Federal investigators joined the case on November 17. Their forensic survey of the site reaffirmed the earlier findings: no sign of violence, no indication of struggle, and no biological evidence of injury. Cell tower data placed all 4 brothers' phones in the same 3-mile radius before simultaneous signal loss at 5:23 p.m. on the night they disappeared. Analysts described the sudden blackout as a synchronized dead zone, though no technical malfunction could explain it. Local law enforcement introduced waterway searches, deploying divers into nearby creeks and reservoirs. Submerged objects were retrieved and catalogued, including an old hunting boot and a torn piece of camouflage fabric. Laboratory testing later confirmed the boot belonged to none of the Carvers. By the end of the 2nd week, resources thinned. Volunteers returned home. Helicopter fuel costs mounted. The search perimeter expanded but hope contracted. Investigators began exploring non-traditional leads. Psychics called in from other states claiming visions of the brothers near abandoned cabins or deep ravines. These were documented but ultimately disregarded. Several tips reported an unfamiliar man seen traveling alone through the valley weeks prior to the disappearance, a drifter known locally as Red. Despite multiple follow-up attempts, no verifiable identification or residence for this individual was ever confirmed. Meanwhile, public fascination intensified online. True crime forums and social media groups dissected every known detail. The Carver case became a subject of endless speculation: human trafficking, cult activity, government cover-up, alien abduction. But while theories multiplied, facts did not. By early December, official search operations were scaled down. The Montana Department of Fish, Wildlife and Parks issued a final report classifying the brothers as missing, presumed deceased due to environmental exposure. The file was archived pending new evidence. But for Diane Carver, the search never ended. She remained in Hamilton, renting a small cabin near the forest edge. Locals reported seeing her drive daily along the gravel roads where her son's tire tracks had once been. Each evening she left the porch light burning, saying the woods still owed her an answer. Winter came and went. Snow melted over the Bitterroot slopes, revealing nothing new: no bones, no gear, no trace of 4 men who had walked into the timber and simply ceased to exist. The investigation had reached its limit, but the silence of the mountains remained absolute. By early spring of 2019, the official search for the Carver brothers had been declared inactive. Law enforcement records indicated only 2 active personnel remained loosely assigned to the case, Ranger Cole Ramsey of the Montana Forest Service and Detective Mara Hensley of Ravalli County Sheriff's Office. Their mandate was limited: follow up on credible new leads, should any surface. But in Bitterroot, the case refused to die. The forest itself became an object of obsession. Locals spoke of unease, an instinctual dread that lingered even in daylight. Hunters began reporting strange sounds deep in the timberlands, distant cries, faint but unmistakably human. Campers swore they saw campfires burning on ridges where no trails existed. Those who hiked near Widow's Draw claimed the woods there watched them back. These reports were dismissed initially as folklore born of grief. Yet, when multiple accounts began surfacing from seasoned hunters and forest personnel, they were logged for analysis. Between May and August 2019, 6 separate sightings of unexplained campfires were reported within a 5-mile radius of Widow's Draw. When rangers arrived at each site, they found ash still warm, but no footprints, no utensils, no trace of habitation. One ranger documented a strange auditory event on June 12. While patrolling at dusk, he recorded a faint rhythmic sound, 3 knocks, a pause, then one more, echoing from the ridge. The source could not be located. The audio was analyzed and determined to be of indeterminate origin, possibly human. At this time, local rumors began to converge around a single name, Red. According to decades-old hunting records and forest citations, a man matching the description, a loner with a tattered red cap, had been sighted multiple times in the Bitterroot backcountry between 2005 and 2008 for illegal trapping. The man, identified as Silas Red Boone, had no fixed address and no surviving relatives. He was known for living off-grid in makeshift camps, bartering furs for supplies, and vanishing for months at a time. After 2008, Boone's name vanished from state records. No tax filings, no driver's license renewals, no hospital admissions. It was as though he had stepped out of existence. Yet, locals in the Bitterroot Valley continued to claim otherwise. A store clerk in Darby mentioned seeing a man matching Boone's description buying canned goods in 2017, quiet, dirty, and watching the clerk too long. A camper near Stevensville reported hearing low humming near his site one night, then finding a small pile of stones arranged in a spiral pattern outside his tent by morning. Ranger Ramsey reopened Boone's file, suspecting a possible connection. Old enforcement notes placed Boone's final known camp less than 3 miles from Widow's Draw, the last GPS ping from the Carver brothers' phones. When investigators revisited the area, they found evidence of old habitation. Rusted traps, a broken lantern, animal bones arranged in piles. At the center of the clearing, partially buried under debris, was a fire ring of blackened stones. Forensics recovered charred metal fragments later identified as parts of rifle casings. The samples were sent to the Montana State Crime Lab. The report dated June 21 confirmed the fragments were from a .308 Winchester casing, the same caliber used by the Carver brothers. This was the first physical overlap between Boone's territory and the Carvers' disappearance. Locals began referring to Widow's Draw as the place the forest swallowed. Hunting permits in the area dropped by 40%. Experienced guides refused to take clients within 10 miles of the site. The Bitterroot, once a hunting haven, became a name whispered with unease. Despite growing public fear, the case remained unsolved. Investigators theorized Boone, if alive, could have encountered the brothers, perhaps a territorial dispute or an act of violence that escalated in isolation. Yet without a body or eyewitness, the narrative remained speculation. During a late-season drone sweep that October, aerial footage captured something anomalous, a faint circular clearing deep inside Widow's Draw. Satellite comparison revealed it hadn't existed 2 years prior. When ground teams attempted to locate the site, GPS devices malfunctioned repeatedly, losing signal within the same half-mile radius. Only manual navigation led them to the area. What they found was not a camp, but what appeared to be an abandoned watch post, hand-built from fallen logs, concealed by pine boughs, overlooking a steep ravine. Inside, they recovered a single personal item, a rusted red cap, partially burned along its brim. The item was logged as evidence 47 RC, cap, red, fabric, heavily degraded. DNA results were inconclusive. After its discovery, the sightings stopped. No more campfire reports, no more strange sounds. The woods fell silent again, but it was the kind of silence that carried weight. By the end of 2019, the case file contained 642 pages of field reports, 317 public tips, and 0 confirmed leads. Yet investigators noted a pattern in every search map, a cluster of sightings, all circling the same uninhabited valley, Widow's Draw. In official documentation, the forest was still classified as open public land. But to locals, it had become something else, a place spoken of only in past tense. And in every retelling, one name remained. Red. Some said he was still out there, watching from the ridges. Others whispered that he'd gone mad long before the Carvers arrived. Either way, by winter's first snow, Widow's Draw had claimed its own legend, one that blurred the line between myth and crime. It was no longer just about 4 missing brothers. It was about what might still be out there, in the trees, waiting. It was as if the mountains had chosen to keep their secret. On the morning of October 14, 2013, 5 years and 6 days after the official closure of the Carver disappearance investigation, an emergency call was logged at 6:42 a.m. by a rancher named Dale Whitmore. The report stated that, a man in torn clothing, had been seen staggering along a remote service road bordering the southern edge of the Bitterroot National Forest, approximately 27 miles from the last known location of the brothers' vehicle. When first responders arrived, they found a single male collapsed beside a culvert. He was severely underweight, his face pale and beard untrimmed, his clothing torn and waterlogged. Initial identification through fingerprints confirmed the impossible: Wyatt James Carver, the eldest of the 4 missing brothers. His physical condition was critical. Medical examination at St. Patrick Hospital, Missoula, noted extreme malnutrition, severe dehydration, and exposure injuries consistent with long-term outdoor survival. His BMI had dropped to 16.4. Scarring was noted across both forearms, alongside numerous minor lacerations of varying ages. Of particular interest was the item found clutched in his right hand, a hunting knife with a wooden grip engraved with the initials SB. The knife was heavily rusted but otherwise intact. Investigation confirmed it did not belong to Wyatt or any of the other Carver brothers. Further analysis matched the carving style and handle material to a known brand used by Silas Boone, the off-grid drifter formerly nicknamed Red. Wyatt regained consciousness within 24 hours but remained in a state of profound mutism. Hospital staff described his behavior as compliant yet unresponsive. He appeared aware of his surroundings but refused to answer verbal prompts. Neuropsychological evaluation ruled out brain injury, suggesting selective trauma-induced silence. His body bore no signs of recent injury, however, several scars were determined to be over a decade old, predating the 2008 disappearance. Traces of soot were found under his nails, and samples taken from his clothing contained ash, pine resin, and soil compounds unique to the Widow's Draw region. Upon his discovery, the Carver case was reclassified as an active homicide investigation. Detective Mara Hensley resumed lead coordination. Her first report noted the peculiar absence of any survival tools with Wyatt: no food, no pack, no water container. The only item recovered was the knife. His reappearance reopened every old wound in the Bitterroot Valley. Media outlets descended upon the area, framing it as the silent survivor. Wyatt's mother, Diane Carver, was notified at her temporary residence in Hamilton, Montana. Records state she arrived at the hospital within 3 hours, though her visit was restricted due to Wyatt's medical state. Her statement, preserved in the official file, expressed confusion as to how her son could have survived 5 years in wilderness terrain where even experienced rescue teams had failed to endure more than a week without resupply. Investigators began reconstruction of the timeline surrounding Wyatt's reappearance. Meteorological data confirmed heavy rainfall in the Bitterroot Range that week, resulting in minor mudslides near Widow's Draw. Aerial reconnaissance conducted after the storm revealed partial exposure of a landslide area previously mapped as unstable during the original 2008 search. Within that newly exposed section, forensic teams located disturbed soil layers, suggesting possible human activity. The knife's provenance became the focal point of analysis. Engravings and handle material confirmed manufacturing dates between 2006 to 2007. Boone had been cited twice during that period for trapping violations. One citation specifically listed his possession of a custom hunting knife matching the description. Boone's trail ended in 2008, near the same month the Carver brothers vanished. Wyatt's fingerprints were later found faintly impressed in the knife's handle over the older etching. This indicated prolonged handling, though not necessarily ownership. DNA swabs recovered from the blade's base revealed 2 distinct male profiles. One matched Wyatt, the other remained unidentified but consistent with previous, unknown male, DNA recovered from the Widow's Draw cave samples years earlier. This was the first verified forensic link between Wyatt and the unknown figure suspected to have encountered the brothers. Despite extensive medical intervention, Wyatt's condition remained unchanged for weeks. His silence deepened, he avoided eye contact, resisted food, and frequently stared out of his hospital window toward the tree line. Staff noted recurring episodes of panic triggered by the smell of smoke or sudden loud noises. Detectives attempted multiple nonverbal methods of communication, including photo prompts, topographic maps, and personal items from the family home. Wyatt showed visible reactions to imagery depicting Widow's Draw, particularly the aerial photographs of the canyon's entrance. He became agitated, pulling his sheets tight, his breathing rapid. Psychiatric evaluation documented consistent physiological markers of fear response when shown images of fire, dark woods, or human figures in the distance. The reaction profile suggested learned trauma rather than psychosis. The knife was retained as primary Exhibit 1, recovered October 14, 2013, and entered into federal custody for forensic preservation. Media speculation grew rapidly, labeling Wyatt as both a miracle and a mystery. Online forums debated whether he had been held captive or had simply lost his memory. However, internal case documentation leaned toward a third possibility, that Wyatt had survived alongside someone else. Satellite analysis of storm-affected regions identified several depressions consistent with shallow graves or collapsed shelters. Excavations were scheduled under the supervision of Ranger Ramsey. Soil core samples confirmed organic decay within one of the depressions. DNA later matched Nolan Carver, the second eldest brother. The findings reinforced a grim pattern: Wyatt had emerged alive, but not alone in what he had endured. The combination of forensic links, the knife, the unidentified DNA, and the disturbed terrain, suggested not just a disappearance, but a prolonged sequence of events extending years beyond 2008. Wyatt remained silent through it all. He offered no explanation, no acknowledgement, no memory that could clarify what happened to Levi and Tucker, the youngest of the Carver brothers. By December 2013, local law enforcement summarized the reactivation report with one line that would later become infamous among investigators. One came back. But whatever he brought with him from those woods, stayed. The official case summary closed with an internal note written by Detective Hensley herself. He did not escape the forest. The forest simply let him go. And with that, the Carver investigation shifted from a missing persons inquiry to something deeper, darker, an unfolding truth buried beneath 5 years of silence. It was as if the mountains decided to return one of their own, just to remind the living what they had taken. Following the reappearance of Wyatt Carver, the Bitterroot disappearance was officially reopened on October 20, 2013, under the joint jurisdiction of Ravalli County Sheriff's Department and the U.S. Forest Service Investigative Unit. The case, once considered a wilderness accident, was now designated as an active forensic inquiry involving potential foul play. Detective Cole Ramsey, the same ranger who had led the original 2008 search, was reinstated as the local field coordinator. His first step was to re-examine the topographical data surrounding Widow's Draw, a narrow canyon once considered too unstable for extensive ground searches. Satellite imaging taken after recent rainfall revealed several disturbances near the lower ridge, one resembling a partially collapsed shelter. On October 23, a four-person investigative team entered the area equipped with drones, ground-penetrating radar, and forensic collection kits. The terrain was unforgiving, steep, cold, and choked with wet pine debris. At precisely 14:36 hours, a thermal drone picked up a hollow cavity reading beneath an overhang at grid coordinate WDR-17C. Upon manual inspection, investigators discovered the narrow entrance of a cave concealed by vines and fallen brush. Inside, the air was dry, stale, and faintly metallic. The floor was layered with old pine needles and compacted dirt, suggesting years of undisturbed isolation. The first notable finding was a tattered wool blanket, half buried under debris, showing signs of deliberate placement. Adjacent to it, carved crudely into the rock wall with what appeared to be a knife tip, were the letters WC08. The inscription was photographed, cast, and logged as Exhibit 4, cave etching. Initial visual assessment confirmed the carving's age consistent with the original disappearance year. Beneath the blanket, forensic analysis uncovered dried blood traces forming two distinct absorption patterns. The first pattern was concentrated and dark, indicative of an older wound, its degradation consistent with environmental exposure over 5 years. The second stain was smaller, sharper, and chemically distinct, suggesting a fresher deposit formed no more than 1 to 2 years prior. Samples were extracted and labeled Blood Sample A and Blood Sample B. DNA testing conducted at the Montana State Crime Laboratory later confirmed Sample A belonged to Wyatt Carver. Sample B produced a result labeled Unknown Male 1, matching the same unidentified genetic material found on the knife Wyatt had been holding upon his rescue. This confirmation tied Wyatt directly to the cave, and to an unknown second individual. Further inspection of the cave yielded additional findings. A rusted tin can with corrosion rings suggesting repetitive heating over fire. A charred log fragment consistent with human-made fire remains. Several fragments of cloth fibers resembling those used in hunting jackets. A bootlace, knotted and frayed, positioned near the back wall. Each item was bagged, coded, and transferred for laboratory analysis. The evidence suggested at least 2 human occupants had used the cave as a temporary shelter. The environment showed no signs of predation, indicating human activity rather than animal habitation. The dry conditions preserved much of the biological evidence, allowing for detailed reconstruction. The findings were damning. The cave wasn't merely a campsite. It was a refuge, or perhaps a prison. Subsequent soil composition testing indicated multiple layers of disturbance, with deeper sediment showing traces of ash, carbon residue, and human fat particles, a chemical signature often associated with prolonged exposure to burning organic matter. The cave's proximity to Widow's Draw, a canyon infamous for echoing sounds and losing daylight early, added to its psychological isolation. Investigators began reconstructing a potential sequence. The Carver brothers likely took shelter in this cave during their hunting trip. Something occurred, perhaps a confrontation, that resulted in injury and blood loss. Wyatt survived, but another individual, the unknown male, either aided or harmed him. In reviewing archived 2008 Ranger reports, Detective Ramsey rediscovered the file referencing a transient trapper named Silas Boone, known locally as Red. Boone had been sighted near Widow's Draw the same autumn the Carvers vanished. He was reported for illegal trapping and unlicensed hunting but disappeared before any follow-up could occur. Cross-referencing Boone's prior citations revealed he owned a custom hunting knife engraved with his initials, SB. The same initials found on the weapon Wyatt was carrying. Boone's last known location placed him less than 5 miles from the discovered cave. When the results from soil isotope testing returned, another disturbing detail emerged: trace concentrations of human calcium and phosphorus near the back of the cave, consistent with partial decomposition. However, no skeletal remains were recovered. Investigators concluded the body, if there had been one, had been removed long before discovery. Public knowledge of the reopened investigation reignited national attention. Media networks dubbed it the Bitterroot Enigma. Online communities speculated that Wyatt may have been both victim and witness to something unspeakable, possibly involving Boone, possibly involving his own brothers. Meanwhile, forensic technicians reconstructed the scene digitally. Based on droplet patterns and spatial mapping, they determined that blood sample A, Wyatt, had likely been deposited while standing, while blood sample B, unknown male, originated from a prone position approximately 2 meters away. The contrast suggested a violent event, one man wounded, another incapacitated. Ramsey's internal memo, dated October 29, 2013, summarized the conclusion. This was not an accident site. It was a containment site. Someone stayed here long enough to survive, and someone else didn't. Search efforts expanded across Widow's Draw. Using the coordinates derived from drainage patterns and flood runoffs, teams began uncovering other anomalies: fragments of personal items, metallic shrapnel, and a single .308 caliber bullet casing matching ammunition once owned by the Carver brothers. Laboratory analysis confirmed the casing had been fired, but ballistic scoring revealed striations inconsistent with Wyatt's rifle. The weapon that discharged the bullet had never been registered to any of the Carver brothers. This finding established the second firearm in the forest, the first material evidence that another person had been armed during the incident. Public interest surged, and conspiracy theories flourished. Some claimed Wyatt had joined Boone, others believed he had been hunted by him. Yet through every headline, Wyatt remained silent. He refused food, medical interviews, and psych evaluations. His condition deteriorated, but his silence remained unbroken. Investigators continued to assemble a timeline that increasingly suggested captivity rather than isolation. Survival data estimated that no human could endure 5 Montana winters in open terrain without assistance or concealment. The cave provided both. But the dual blood types indicated he had not been alone in that darkness. In November 2013, a single report line entered into the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit log became the defining statement of the reopened case. Whatever happened inside that cave wasn't survival, it was coexistence. And thus began the next stage of the investigation, to uncover who the second man was, and what role Wyatt played in the years the mountains kept him hidden. The public wanted answers. Investigators wanted truth. But the forest, once again, gave neither. The only certainty recorded in the official case file that Winter read: 4 brothers vanished. 1 came back. But in that cave, 2 had bled. The reopening of the Carver case entered its most disturbing phase on November 11, 2013, when field investigators returned to the Bitterroot Range for a secondary excavation sweep. The focus zone was a 400-yard radius around the cave designated as Site WDR-17C, now considered a crime scene. Using forensic magnetometry, ground-penetrating radar, and soil acidity mapping, they aimed to trace the migration of biological residue and locate additional points of human activity. At 9:42 hours, the radar detected anomalous subsurface patterns approximately 60 feet east of the cave entrance, an elongated formation consistent with a shallow trench or man-made pit. Surrounding soil contained high concentrations of carbon, indicating sustained exposure to fire. As excavation commenced, field agent Mara Lytle uncovered a fragmented animal trap, its rusted teeth still coated with congealed organic material. It was not consistent with wildlife residue. Forensic luminol testing later confirmed trace amounts of human hemoglobin on the metal. The discovery immediately shifted the investigation's direction from survival analysis to criminal entrapment. Further examination of the area revealed remnants of several charred campfires, each burned down to compact rings of blackened stone. Within one fire ring, beneath a crust of hardened ash, investigators located a half-melted metal button bearing the engraving of a deer antler insignia. The insignia matched a limited series of hunting jackets manufactured by Silver Ridge Outfitters, discontinued in 2006. The same model of jacket had been worn by Silas "Red" Boone, the unregistered trapper last seen in the area prior to the brothers' disappearance. Within hours, the FBI forensics unit confirmed the match. Fiber strands found fused to the button matched Boone's jacket fibers from a 2007 wildlife violation case. The evidence was logged as Exhibit 11, metal button fragment, and marked as a probable link between the Carver case and Boone. By afternoon, the trench itself began to yield more compelling material. Stratified soil analysis revealed multiple disturbance layers. The top layers were modern, likely from recent rain shifts. But the compacted middle strata contained a dense concentration of calcium phosphate, iron, and organic collagen, consistent with decomposed bone matter. Investigators paused excavation and called for the anthropological recovery team from the University of Montana. At 16:08 hours, the first human bone fragment was unearthed from a depth of 32 inches. The fragment, later identified as a distal phalanx, was heavily burned and fractured. Within 20 minutes, additional fragments emerged, a jawbone, rib section, and several vertebrae, all partially charred and embedded in ash-laden sediment. A full recovery yielded 21 bone fragments, forming the partial remains of one adult male. Forensic pathologists confirmed the bones exhibited both thermal damage and blunt force trauma, with several showing distinct notching consistent with cutting or sawing instruments. No personal identification items were found in direct association with the remains. However, 8 inches north of the burial trench, a small canvas pouch was recovered. Inside were a corroded lighter engraved SB, a strip of animal sinew cord, tied in a crude knot, 2 spent .308 cartridges, a torn photograph fragment depicting 3 young men standing near a river, date stamped September 2008. The photograph's background was matched to St. Mary's River, near the original hunting permit location registered to the Carver brothers. DNA sequencing of the bone marrow extracted from the remains produced a partial genetic profile. It did not match any of the Carver brothers. Instead, the mitochondrial DNA linked back to a maternal line originating in Wyoming, consistent with the ancestry of Silas Boone. The official conclusion, entered into the investigative summary under file reference 13 Bitterroot reopen, read: Human remains consistent with the missing drifter known as Silas Boone recovered near site WDR 17C. Evidence of deliberate burial and controlled fire present. Death likely occurred between 2008 to 2010. The revelation created the first verified death in the Bitterroot disappearance and introduced the possibility of human violence between Wyatt Carver and Silas Boone. The narrative of a lost hunting expedition had now evolved into a probable homicide in the wilderness. Investigators reconstructed the timeline as follows: Boone, known for squatting near Widow's Draw, likely encountered the Carver brothers during their hunting trip. Whether through chance or confrontation, Boone may have led them deeper into the forest, to the cave system he occupied. Wyatt's later possession of Boone's knife, and the presence of Boone's DNA both in the cave and the trench, suggested a violent conflict had occurred between them. But the physical evidence introduced a darker, more ambiguous layer. Microscopic residue extracted from the bone fractures revealed micronized steel particles, consistent with repeated strikes from a serrated hunting blade, likely the same knife recovered from Wyatt. However, the distribution of blood evidence inside the cave implied Boone had survived the initial injury long enough to coexist with Wyatt for some time after the attack. Toxicology reports on the marrow further indicated trace deposits of mercury and arsenic, compounds historically found in primitive trapping chemicals used to preserve animal hides. This finding hinted that Boone's environment, or his own survival methods, might have been contaminated, potentially accelerating his deterioration if he was wounded. The psychological division of the investigation, tasked with behavioral reconstruction, proposed that Wyatt may have experienced forced isolation with Boone either as his captor or as his unwilling companion, for months or even years. Boone's predatory tendencies, coupled with the evidence of traps and burnt refuse, painted the portrait of a man both hunter and tormentor, someone who understood the wilderness not as sanctuary, but as a prison he could control. In a confidential memo dated November 14, lead profiler Dr. Helen Cafferty summarized Boone's behavioral pattern as a man drawn to isolation, self-sufficiency, and dominance through control. He viewed suffering as a natural order. It is likely he kept the surviving Carver brothers alive long enough to study or break them psychologically. The team concluded Boone's death was not accidental. Whether killed in self-defense or retaliation, his burial and burning were deliberate acts, carried out by someone with both familiarity and hatred. But the case's most disturbing revelation surfaced during final testing of the recovered items. Inside the fibers of the canvas pouch, forensic microscopy detected a single long strand of human hair, tightly wound and degraded. The DNA analysis confirmed it belonged not to Boone, nor Wyatt, but to Caleb Carver, the youngest of the brothers, aged 19 at the time of disappearance. This discovery reopened an unanswered question: if Boone's remains were found and Wyatt survived, what happened to Caleb, Luke, and Aaron Carver? The public reaction was explosive. Media headlines dubbed Boone the man in the dark. Social media speculated that the Carvers had been victims of abduction, ritual, or even cannibalistic survival. None of these theories were confirmed, but the discovery reignited nationwide attention. Investigators prepared a comprehensive excavation of adjacent areas, marking Site WDR-18A as the next focus point. Soil scans there revealed irregular depressions, too shallow to be natural erosion, yet too structured to be random. As daylight faded over Bitterroot Valley, Detective Ramsey's final note for the day summarized the tone of the investigation perfectly. The forest gave back one man. It buried another. But it still keeps its count incomplete. At 1842 hours, just before the team secured the site for the night, Agent Lytle noticed a bone shard jutting from the embankment near the trench. When it was gently brushed free, it revealed a human molar, unburned, with intact enamel. Under the lamplight, forensic pathologist Dr. Cafferty whispered her conclusion to the report recorder. This doesn't belong to Boone. The official report ends the day's entry on a single, chilling line, setting up the next chapter. Further excavation at Site WDR-18A confirmed presence of additional human remains. The excavation of Site WDR-18A began on November 19, 2013, under freezing rain and limited daylight. The ground was dense with frost, slowing the work to an exhausting crawl. Floodlights were erected, and each square meter was catalogued with precision. By 10:14 hours, excavation teams recovered 3 separate bone clusters arranged in a roughly circular pattern, consistent with an intentional concealment burial rather than a random dispersal. Forensic technician C. O'Donnell noted that the sediment layers surrounding the remains were disturbed at least twice, implying the grave had been opened and resealed. Within hours, the team confirmed the skeletal formation belonged to a single adult male, positioned face down, arms bound behind the spine with coarse leather cord. The occipital bone was shattered, radial fractures radiated across the skull, blunt force trauma, consistent with a single, heavy strike. Beside the body lay fragments of a leather boot, a spent rifle casing, and the corroded remains of a belt buckle engraved with the initials NC. The initials matched Nolan Carver, age 27 at the time of disappearance. The buckle had been a custom gift from his mother, confirmed through photographic evidence in her family albums. DNA testing verified the match within 48 hours. The Carver family, and the entire Bitterroot community, finally had their first confirmed death. The autopsy, conducted under report number RC-MN47A, revealed the following. Cause of death, cranial blunt force trauma. Manner of death, homicide. Time since death, approximately 4.5 to 5 years. Presence of environmental ash residues and calcium carbonate, consistent with prior proximity to fire. Nolan's body bore no evidence of defensive wounds. His hands, bound behind him, showed deep abrasions around the wrist bones, indicating he was restrained while alive. Soil residue beneath his fingernails suggested he had attempted to claw through compacted dirt during burial. This discovery changed the tone of the entire investigation. The case was no longer a wilderness disappearance or survival tragedy, it was now officially a series of homicides. As forensic teams worked through the night, more artifacts surfaced: a half-burned photograph, the same one found in Boone's pouch, now complete with its missing half, Wyatt and Nolan side by side beside their truck. Both halves matched seamlessly, confirming that Boone had once been in possession of the Carver's belongings. Inside Nolan's coat pocket, researchers found a single matchstick, unburned, wrapped in cloth. Traces of kerosene and animal fat coated the cloth. It was logged as evidence 24Ng, and later connected to accelerant mixtures used in primitive survival fires. But the forensic analysts noted an anomaly: kerosene residue was also detected deep in Nolan's sinus cavity, suggesting exposure to open flame during or immediately before death. This evidence indicated that fire had played a deliberate role in his killing. When Wyatt Carver was confronted with the discovery, he remained mostly unresponsive. His physical condition continued to deteriorate, he was malnourished, emotionally detached, and mostly mute. Yet during a late-night observation at Ravalli General Hospital, a psychiatric nurse recorded an incident that entered the report as Case Note 77WC. Subject sat upright during REM disturbance, repeating the phrases, "the deal," and "the fire." Continued for approximately 47 seconds before returning to silence. Subsequent notes repeated variations of this event. Wyatt's sleep patterns were erratic, marked by tremors and panic reactions. When investigators showed him photographs from the excavation, his eyes fixated on Nolan's buckle for several seconds before he turned away. He refused to respond to written questions. The Forensic Psychology Division, led by Dr. Helen Cafferty, interpreted these reactions not as memory loss but as trauma-based suppression. Wyatt's brain had built a cognitive wall around the event, one anchored to fire and betrayal. Parallel to the psychological assessment, forensic reconstruction teams attempted to map the physical sequence leading to Nolan's death. The lack of drag marks around the grave indicated the burial took place within feet of the murder site. The fracture pattern on Nolan's skull suggested the use of a flat, heavy object, possibly a rifle stock or large rock. One wood fiber fragment retrieved from the cranial wound matched the composition of Wyatt Carver's Remington Model 700, the weapon he had carried on the trip. But the rifle had never been found. The last recorded trace of it appeared in Boone's cave, a partial impression in the dirt floor resembling a rifle butt. Investigators theorized that Boone may have taken the weapon after Nolan's death, or that Wyatt used it against both Boone and his own brother in a desperate confrontation. By December 2013, the Carver disappearance had fully transitioned into what the press dubbed the Bitterroot murders. Public fascination reached a fever pitch. True crime outlets dissected every possible motive: fraternal conflict, survival madness, or manipulation by Boone, the drifter who treated isolation as religion. The FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit concluded that the brothers' disappearance was likely the product of coercion, starvation, and psychological fracture under isolation. The presence of animal traps, the burned remains, and the alternating burial style suggested more than one killer, possibly one victim forced to bury another. In confidential internal notes, Dr. Cafferty hypothesized that Wyatt's muttered references to "the deal" and "the fire" implied a moral bargain, a survival pact that collapsed under pressure. It was possible that Boone had offered food, safety, or escape to one brother in exchange for compliance against the others. When the pact was broken, violence followed. One chilling possibility emerged: Wyatt may have been forced to choose which brother lived. In the final page of the month's report, Detective Ramsey summarized his findings with a precision that bordered on resignation. The evidence shows a controlled, human sequence: capture, confinement, coercion, death. The brothers did not vanish together. They vanished one by one. Nolan Carver's remains were transferred to the Ravalli County morgue on December 2, accompanied by a personal effects envelope labeled "Recovered from Subject's Coat, Site WDR-18A." Inside the envelope, along with the matchstick, was a torn slip of paper, its ink nearly erased by water damage. Infrared reconstruction revealed faint lettering, 2 short lines scrawled in pencil. "He said only one gets to leave. I lit it anyway." The report closes with no follow-up explanation. The handwriting matched Wyatt's. And so, the discovery of Nolan Carver's grave not only confirmed murder, it exposed something deeper, the beginning of a terrible choice made in the dark. When the chapter of official recovery ended that night, investigators noted a single observation in the logbook for the Bitterroot site. Wind constant. Smell of ash returns every dusk. Soil still warm under frost. The woods were not finished speaking. By January 4, 2014, the Bitterroot case reached what investigators initially believed was its terminal stage. 1 confirmed homicide, 3 bodies unaccounted for, and a survivor too damaged to recall the past. Search operations had been reduced to low-level recovery missions focused on skeletal remains or personal artifacts. The Montana State Forensic Bureau had cataloged over 317 items, from spent casings to shreds of fabric, all cross-referenced and analyzed. Then came the anomaly. During a secondary grid inspection near Ridge Sector 5C, Ranger Mara Hensley recorded the presence of 5 separate impressions in the soil beneath a shallow overhang, 4 distinct boot prints of similar pattern, and 1 larger, older imprint inconsistent with the brothers' standard hunting gear. The pattern bore the hallmarks of a military-grade combat sole, weathered and deeply pressed, suggesting a heavier gait. The area lay approximately 2.3 miles east of Widow's Draw, beyond the original perimeter of the 2008 search. Tree ring dating and erosion estimates indicated that the soil had not been disturbed for roughly 4 to 5 years. A subsequent excavation revealed a 5th bedroll, partially decomposed, containing decayed remnants of nylon fiber and synthetic down. It was placed between 2 others, not apart from them, as if its occupant had been part of the group, not an intruder. Inside the fabric folds, investigators found 2 items, a brass Zippo lighter, engraved with the initials SB, and a plastic ID badge fragment from a supply depot located near Fort Harrison, Montana. Neither item belonged to any of the Carver brothers. The brass lighter was traced to an ex-serviceman named Silas Boone, the same drifter once known locally as Red. But the ID badge fragment, faintly imprinted with an Army emblem and partial serial code, was not Boone's. Cross-referencing with archived personnel databases revealed it belonged to Sergeant Brent Cole, a retired ordnance technician who had gone missing from a federal survivalist training compound in 2007, 1 year before the Carvers vanished. His disappearance had never been linked to the Bitterroot. Until now. Investigators re-examined Wyatt Carver's clothing for overlooked evidence. In the lining of his jacket, near a tear along the hem, technicians recovered a small clump of matted fibers, a blend of synthetic thread and charred wool, chemically matching the composition of the 5th bedroll. It became apparent that Wyatt had at some point been in direct contact with whoever occupied that 5th campsite. Over the following weeks, FBI analysts reconstructed the camp layout from drone imaging, debris scatter, and fire pit distribution. The pattern revealed 5 sleeping areas, positioned symmetrically around a central fire. Evidence logs indicated 2 separate food caches, suggesting the group had been living, not merely sheltering, at the site. Carbon dating of ash and charcoal revealed fires burned over an extended period, at least 2 weeks. This contradicted earlier assumptions that the brothers vanished within days of entering the forest. Instead, it appeared they had survived deep in the Bitterroot Range for no less than 15 days, possibly longer. The psychological implications of this discovery were profound. A review of Wyatt's hospital observation logs noted recurring physical reactions to fire imagery, elevated pulse, respiratory distress, and temporary catatonia whenever the subject was exposed to light flicker resembling flame. Dr. Cafferty concluded that his silence was not merely trauma-induced but behaviorally conditioned, the byproduct of sustained fear linked to firelight, possibly as a tool of control. The phrase he had once muttered, "the deal," resurfaced in analysts' discussions. Case theorists proposed that the deal may have referred to a pact between Wyatt and the fifth man, a negotiation for survival that ended in betrayal. As forensic teams combed through old material, a photograph fragment from Boone's confiscated possessions yielded new context. Digital enhancement revealed 5 figures around a campfire, but only 4 were clearly visible. The fifth, blurred by motion, appeared on the edge of the frame, half turned away. His build and height were consistent with Levi Carver, the second oldest brother, presumed dead. If this analysis was accurate, then Levi had not died with Nolan. He had remained alive at least long enough to be photographed. Ranger Cole Ramsey, lead investigator, summarized his conclusion in Field Report 12, RC 14. Evidence indicates the group expanded to include a fifth occupant, unidentified at the time of disappearance. Cohabitation patterns imply trust, not immediate threat. Sequence of events following this integration remains unknown. Psychological indicators suggest survivor guilt linked to a moral breach, possibly involving choice, complicity, or conversion to the outsider's ideology. This statement marked the second major pivot of the Bitterroot case. The narrative of abduction and violence began to tilt towards something stranger: integration, manipulation, and assimilation. Forensic climatology suggested that during late autumn 2008, Bitterroot experienced record snowfall, isolating the group from any possible rescue. Within those 2 trapped weeks, dynamics would have changed. Authority, fear, and desperation could have shifted allegiances. Boone, a man already known for living on the fringe of survivalist extremism, might have established dominance over the brothers through necessity, control of fire, food, or direction. But one brother might have adapted rather than resisted. Levi Carver's DNA was never recovered among the blood samples from the cave or the trench. Analysts now theorized that his absence was not a mystery of death, but of relocation. Satellite imaging from 2009, analyzed retroactively, captured what appeared to be a small cabin structure near the head of Wolf Creek Basin, roughly 9 miles from the last confirmed Carver campsite. The cabin, burned out by 2010, had been listed in Forest Service logs as an unregistered squatter shelter. Re-examined in 2014, its foundation still contained bone fragments, human, but too degraded for full profiling. However, a tooth fragment extracted from the ashes matched Wyatt Carver's dental pattern, confirming he had once been there. That placed Wyatt and the unknown fifth man together, alive, after Nolan's murder. The presence of 2 distinct cooking pits at the burn site, one lined with animal bone and the other sterile, suggested a division of purpose, one for sustenance, one for something else. Investigators could not determine what that something else had been. By the time spring arrived in 2014, official channels were no longer certain what the Bitterroot case represented: murder, cult indoctrination, or psychological fracture in isolation. The notion of a fifth blurred the moral lines that once defined the story. Wyatt's silence no longer read as guilt or fear, but perhaps as protection, not for himself, but for whoever might still be alive out there. The FBI case summary closed with this final notation. Recovered evidence confirms 5 individuals were present in the Bitterroot encampment. 4 are accounted for through death or recovery. The 5th, identity uncertain, remains unlocated. Survivors' silence continues. Probability suggests voluntary disappearance of one subject with the 5th man. No further progress was made. Wyatt Carver was transferred to a long-term care facility in Billings, Montana, under protective observation. He refused food for several days, then resumed eating only by firelight. His medical file ends with the observation: subject repeats behavior consistent with companionship conditioning. Displays preference for heat and wilderness imagery. On several occasions, found stacking stones in patterns matching the Wolf Creek Basin site. The forest, it seemed, had not released him, not completely. And for investigators, the question remained suspended in the silence he maintained. Had one of the Carver brothers truly died in the woods, or had one simply stayed behind? It was as if the mountains had decided to keep them. By February 2015, the Bitterroot file was once again sealed, this time under the quiet designation, inactive, psychological resolution. Wyatt Carver, the last surviving brother, had been under continuous observation for nearly 8 years. His physical recovery had stabilized, his mind never did. On the night of March 12, attendants at the Billings State Care Facility found Wyatt unresponsive in his bed. No sign of struggle. No trace of medication misuse. His vitals had simply slowed until they stopped. The coroner recorded cardiac arrest due to prolonged stress disorder. But within his personal effects, investigators found something that complicated that simplicity. Inside a folded towel at the base of his drawer lay 5 small stones, each etched crudely with a symbol, 3 lines and a circle, the same shape carved into the cave wall years before with the initials WC08. Only now there were 5 of them, arranged in a half-moon curve. Beneath the stones, written in faint graphite, was a single word. Home. That discovery reignited quiet interest at the Bureau's Cold Case Division. 2 field officers were dispatched back to the Bitterroot for a courtesy sweep, not a reopening, just a verification. They began near Widow's Draw, the ravine that had first yielded traces of Nolan's blood 6 years earlier. The site had long been reclaimed by weather, overgrown, flooded by seasonal runoff. But satellite mapping had recently flagged anomalous ground movement in the area, soil displacement inconsistent with erosion. When the rangers arrived, they found a subtle mound, freshly disturbed, the snow melting faster there than anywhere else. Preliminary excavation revealed only traces, splintered bark, fragments of rope, and a rusted metal object believed to be the cap of a lantern. No remains were identified, but the thermal imaging scans picked up subsurface voids, pockets of space where the soil had shifted inward, as though something beneath had been dug out and removed. The official report, filed April 9, 2015, summarized it plainly. Localized movement consistent with recent ground disturbance. No human remains recovered. Activity occurred within the last 12 to 18 months. Unknown cause. Which meant, whatever had been buried there, someone had come back for it. That was the final line of the Bitterroot case. It was never reopened. Wyatt's remains were cremated at state order. His ashes were scattered in the same mountain range that had swallowed his family. No living relatives attended. Only a forest ranger, Cole Ramsey, stood at the ridge as the wind carried the last trace of the Carvers back into the timberline. In the following months, hikers reported strange cairns appearing along the northern trails, stacks of 5 stones balanced in near-perfect arcs, always facing west. The Forest Service removed them repeatedly. They always reappeared. The Bitterroot Range fell silent again, but not in peace. Wyatt Carver had gone to his grave without a single recorded word. Yet the evidence he left behind, the carvings, the stones, the patterns, suggested a message that language could not contain. Maybe the truth wasn't buried. Maybe it was alive. Because silence, in the Bitterroot, had never been absence. It had always been presence, patient, waiting, and listening. 4 brothers vanished. 1 came back. And he refused to speak. Maybe he didn't have to. If you made it this far, you're one of the few who never looked away. Subscribe to uncover more stories the world tried to forget, because sometimes, silence is the loudest clue of all.